From fast breaks to buzzer beaters to block parties, there's nothing as exciting as basketball. With Underdog, you can bring that excitement to wherever you watch. Playing on their app is as easy as choosing higher or lower on players, stats like threes made, points, rebounds, and more. Get those picks right, and you could win up to 1,000 times your money. Millions of fans have won over billions on Underdog. Will you be next? Join in on the fun by signing up for Underdog today using promo code ROOT, and you'll get a free pick as part of your first cash entry, plus up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you deposit. Must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Arizona and Massachusetts, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY.
16 technical fouls. How many games have the Wolves played? You double check the standings?
Yes.
I'm going to let you do the math on it.
32 and 28
so that's
is their record.
60 games, right? So what's 60 divided by 16?
60 divided by 16?
Mm-hmm.
That's the question?
That's the question. Even you can handle that.
I'm stalling for time so I can do it. 3.75.
So how do I go about explaining if you've got 16? So he's averaging how many technicals? What's his average technical total per game, mathematically?
Wouldn't it be almost 4 a game?
Would that be right?
I think so.
Usually it's Guardsy in that chair going, we're making fools of ourselves when it comes to math.
It's entirely possible.
I thought you were more capable than that. Let's just say it's too many. Let's definitely say, if somebody looked it up that Cat had 0 technicals last year, is that possible? That Karl Anthony Towns, who's had, I think, double digits once, improved so much that he had 0 last year? That'd be impressive. There's no question about that. 701 guy, Ant getting a lack of calls isn't for a lack of contact. It's the horrible shot selection and his inability to draw the contact in a savvy manner. Combine that with him actually not being a very graceful scorer at the rim, despite the highlight-worthy, aesthetically pleasing layups and dunks, and he feels every missed bunny is the ref's fault. He's not wrong about that. In fact, Johnny had a stat a while ago that his finishing rate at the rim is mediocre, which again surprises people because what we remember are the unbelievable, spectacular plays he makes at the rim. But he doesn't finish as effectively as you'd like. I think it's not a matter of not being a graceful scorer because he can be very graceful. It's a matter of mastering the art, and some of it has to do with spacing, some of it has to do with creating space, of attracting fouls in a, quite frankly, just a more effective way. I don't think that's a strength of his, and yet I'll add, again, that he is number 2 in the league when it comes to attracting fouls, though. So the idea that Ant never gets any calls is just, it's not even an opinion, it's demonstrably inaccurate. It's false, no matter what your perception is shaded. Why? It's shaded because you hear this call incessantly from within the organization and from Edwards himself. And here's what you then remember. You remember the plays where he probably should have gotten a call. And those are the only things that are in your head, and that gets drummed into you day after day, especially if you're a Wolves fan. And you start going, yeah, that's unbelievable. How does he not get more calls? When, in fact, he actually gets quite a few calls.
Stop sending your text now. I see it. I've got about 16 of them.
One tech per 3.75
One technical
games.
foul per 3.75
Yeah,
games.
that's what I'm looking for. Thank you. And that's too high.
Yeah.
We'll all agree, right? That's just too high. It's not a good trade-off to basically say once every 4 games. Now, obviously, he had 2 last night. I'm sure he's had a couple other. I don't know how often he's been thrown out this year. I don't know. But, last night he got the double technical with our old buddy Vanderbilt, I think. And that's the old, I'm not going to take as an official. I'm just going to nail you both. So that counts. And Guardsy mentioned to me, we talked about this on Enough Said today. We're finally back together on that show, regular times tonight. 9:30 on Fox 9, I think 7:30 on Fox 9 Plus. that there were people, is this true? Were there actually people out there saying, well, the refs need to have some sensitivity. They need to know he's that close to being suspended. And so the implication seems to be, if he's that close, if another technical puts him over the edge, that somehow the referee should hedge his bets and be a little bit more circumspect about calling another technical on him. Seriously? You can't mean that, can you? That's the responsibility of the player. That's the responsibility, frankly, of the head coach. That's the responsibility of the team to say, don't put yourself in that position. The idea that, well, he's got so many technicals that they should grade on a more generous curve, it's nonsense. That's letting the player off the hook way too easily. And I had not heard that one, but that's something that Guardsy mentioned. Now, somebody else is saying 0.26 per game. You guys should really be embarrassed. I'm always embarrassed about my math issues. I don't deny them. I face them head on. That's why we're as public about it as we are. I'm not going to resign over it. I'm sorry. Just because we have some mathematics whiz. Looks like it's Craig from Boston, Mass. No, that's not Craig. This is 612 guy. No, this is Paul from Florida. No, that's not him either. Their texts are coming in so fast that I'm assigning them to the wrong people. Yeah, it's another 612 guy, unnamed. You guys should be embarrassed.
I'll be okay.
Embarrassed every day. Big deal. Yeah. What do you want me to do about it? Don't forget Ben Goessling coming up in about 15 minutes or so. I do want to update folks on not so much. We spent a lot of time on the distinguished cinematic career of Gene Hackman yesterday. Today, I want to just update on the story itself about what happened in his home, because there's some new details emerging that are rather concerning. So we'll get an update on that and, do a little housekeeping. As I mentioned, we've got a very distinguished list of Minnesota Calendar of Calamity items. There were so many today that instead of tweeting them out, as Dan Minnesota often does, he emailed them to me. That's how many there are, and there are some good ones. So that'll be part of the conversation.
Did you know that dance breaks are good for your heart? That swimming can help you sleep better? Even roller skating can help keep you healthy. Learn how to make physical activity fun for you and your family. Visit cdc.gov/moving matters.
Here's the latest from investigators on the story out of New Mexico, in which the partially mummified bodies of Oscar winner Gene Hackman and his wife were found at their New Mexico home. I believe one dog also found dead. A maintenance worker was the individual who reported the deaths of Hackman, who's 95, his wife Betsy Arakawa, 65. He reported their deaths on Wednesday. And they're still attempting, investigators, to solve this mystery. These deaths are now viewed as suspicious. The original theory that was advanced publicly, and it got some steam because it came from a family member, I think Hackman's daughter, was the possibility of carbon monoxide poisoning. But my understanding is that further investigation has not indicated that is indeed the issue. They had apparently been dead for days, perhaps even as long as a couple of weeks, when the bodies were found. They were decomposing, mummification in Arakawa's hands, according to the search warrant affidavit. Hackman's body found in the home's entryway. Her body, I believe, found in a bathroom. And apparently it's not rare for a body to mummify, according to the chief medical examiner in Maricopa County, Arizona. Depends on the amount of moisture in the air. Santa Fe is an extremely dry region of the United States. That's where they lived. The worker called 911 after spotting the bodies at the couple's home. He reported that the home's front door was open when he arrived to do what's described as routine work. Conflicting stories about the doors, apparently. Several doors were unlocked and a rear door was open, according to one investigator, which allowed 2 dogs that survived to go in and out. Also, this individual, a county sheriff, said he thinks the front door was closed but unlocked. A dead German Shepherd found in a kennel near Arakawa. We keep saying no foul play was suspected, authorities said, though investigators wrote in the warrant they did think the deaths were suspicious enough in nature to require a thorough search and investigation. Investigator noted people may not show signs of poisoning if they are exposed to gas leaks or carbon monoxide, but that there weren't signs of a leak at the home. The gas company tested the gas lines at the home, did not find any signs of difficulties at the time as well. There was, I also believe, a report that pills were found. I want to say it was near her body. So what you make of that, who knows what that might mean. When the assumption is you're going to get a lot more information on the basis of autopsies in these 2 cases, and that perhaps that will ultimately solve this particular mystery. That's the latest I've seen. If anybody has any newer information, and I know there's wild speculation, there's a lot of rampant speculation out there, and there often is in a case like this where you go, well, this doesn't. What's the story here? This does not, does not seem to add up. I don't believe Hackman was facing any acute medical condition at the time. He had, I think, retired early from. I say early. He certainly, had made enough money where he could retire anytime he wanted to, but had walked away from a very successful acting career about 20 years ago in some measure because of health issues then, like heart problems that his doctors had said maybe you might want to, just sort of take it easy and not go down that strenuous road any longer. But I don't know that there was anything else that we've been made aware of that was of an acute nature that might have had something to do with it. It's very hard to say. So in any case, that's where we're at with that story. It's a, somebody is interesting. I got a text yesterday. I didn't respond to on air that left me a little bit perplexed. And some days I make the decision to go public. Some days I don't, because I don't know that everybody's obviously entitled to their opinion. And I don't know, some days I don't know if it serves any purpose, but it interested me to the extent that he was bothered. He seemed bothered that we would give outsized attention to a celebrity that every day people that you and I know die. And for some reason, we don't seem to be giving as much weight to those individuals who have passed away. And how can I explain this in a way that I think should be obvious to most people? There's always in fact, I think I said at one point, look, Gene Hackman didn't cure any diseases. He ain't Mayo Clinic big knocker. He ain't curing cancer with what he did. But I would think it's fairly self-evident that part of the reason I have no apologies for celebrating one's career, that doesn't make him a superhuman, Gene Hackman. Extremely flawed human, we were reminded. But given the importance of popular culture when it comes, whether you're talking about sports or you're talking about motion pictures, you're talking about music, most people think that those forms of culture enrich our lives. Doesn't cure any diseases, but has value. And so my intent on a day like yesterday then is to celebrate that value. What made that particular artist unique? What did he or she bring to the table? And then you do clips because people have memories that they associate with their favorite films. I must have gotten 4 or 5 dozen emails and texts from people yesterday about their own favorite Hackman film. So it becomes kind of a way station where you sort of, it's almost like you're at the corner bar and you're having that kind of a wake in which you attempt to do it. And the reason I think that we tend to not spend an entire show on an individual who is less famous is that individual is not part of our shared experience. That life is real. The tragedy is real. In fact, many times, and this is part of the reason we have Mayo Clinic big knocker Bill Maurice on, is on the medical side, there are tragedies that take place all the time. And so you want to have experts like Knocker on to talk about some of the issues that are raised there. But the idea that we're going to celebrate or the life of someone that the audience as a whole is just unlikely to know. We tend to not know the same anonymous people. That doesn't mean they're not important, does not mean that their story should not be told. But I felt like it should be, I didn't even try to debate that individual because it seemed like such an elementary observation to understand why we go down the road we do and why, sadly, more anonymous people who we don't know in terms of what they do, who may not have that sort of cultural influence and therefore might not get quite the same amount of attention in a given show. But that person seemed flummoxed by it. And maybe they're not a big Hackman fan. I don't know. It's not even a matter of that. But to me, on this show, I think that where you try to thread the needle is not pretend that means Gene Hackman is Superman or that he is automatically, worthy of the Nobel Peace Prize. You try to keep it into perspective of what was his art? What did he give us that was interesting? How did he make us either laugh or smile, whatever the case may be? Fortunately, I think most of the individuals yesterday seemed to understand exactly that, and that's something we'll continue to try to pride ourselves on. I just don't think it's a big mystery to try to distinguish between a famous person and someone not so famous when it comes to how much time you're going to devote to that particular story. Because most of the programs that we do, I think, it's that shared experience. It's that universality. So you try to talk about things and people that other individuals can relate to. And a lot of people in our audience could relate to Gene Hackman's filmography. It's very distinguished and very impressive. Let's pause for a bottom of the hour and return to the safety of the toy department. Let's get caught up with Ben Goessling, get his reaction to the news on Matthew Stafford, who appears now, after all the hubbub, is staying with the Rams. What implications are that regarding where Sam Darnold might land and where even Aaron Rodgers might land? So we'll get to all of that and much more with our guy, Ben Goessling, brought to you by our good friends at Standard Heating and Air Conditioning.
Welcome to the perfect night in Minneapolis. Simple Plan is coming to the Armory August 19th with special guest Bowling for Soup, 303 and more. Don't miss out on a night of nostalgic early 2000s anthems. Tickets on sale now. Get all the details, KFAN.com, keyword calendar.
The words out on the street.
So I don't know whether our next guest can answer, to me, the critical question of Combine Week. Because I'm trying to figure out whether, in fact, Matthew Stafford was ever for sale, or whether this became a manufactured story among the Jackals, because you need stories on Combine Week that go beyond whether, God bless him, is he going to throw just during his pro day or will he throw at the Combine? I don't care, but a lot of people obviously do. Because in the end, it appears that Matthew Stafford is staying with the Los Angeles Rams of Anaheim. Ben Goessling covers the National Football League and the Vikings for the Star Tribune, StarTribune.com, and joins us weekly, brought to you by Standard Heating and Air Conditioning. So before we get to what ramifications there might be that affect the Vikings on the Stafford news, was he ever really going anywhere? Or is this one of those deals where you Jackals say, we need a couple other stories that are greater than, 40 times. So Stafford's a big name. It's kind of nice to have an extra story or two like this in our back pocket. to speculate on? Because earlier today it was he's going to the Giants. Giants are all in. And then suddenly it turned to, no, actually, he's going to stay with the Rams. So what do we think happened here?
Well, I do think these things, I mean, they can turn fairly quickly. I don't have enough reporting specifically on Stafford. I've been kind of closer to quarterback situations that have some ramifications to the Vikings, which there are plenty of those.
Yep.
But I have seen it before where the question of, are you going to accept a restructured contract, or if not, things could turn in a matter of hours. I have seen that happen. I can remember Everson Griffin, I think in 2019, I want to say, it was they needed to have him accept a restructured deal to fit him under the cap so they could get Anthony Barr signed. And it got so close that he was sitting in the parking lot of the TCO Performance Center waiting to see if his agent got a deal done.
Ooh.
And he would be able to enter the building. So, I mean, it can do that. I remember last year with Danielle Hunter, it was going to be if they didn't get a reworked deal done, they were looking very seriously at trading him. So I have seen these things turn on that kind of a dime before. Don't know quite what the details would be on this one, but it is plausible, I think, that it could spin that fast.
Yeah, well, it sounds as if this is how it's going to go. Now he's agreed to renegotiated terms. He obviously wanted more money than he was slated to make next year for the Rams, and they may have come to some kind of a compromise. So what does this mean for the Vikings and the Darnold domino? Do you think the fact that he ends up staying with the Rams makes Darnold all the more valuable when it comes to, contract possibilities? Does it enhance the possibilities that deep down the Vikings will feel obligated to at least franchise him with the belief that there's enough of a market out there now for sure that then they can indeed then move him?
Well, I mean, the Rams thing does take away what I thought was a fairly good fit for him, both because the scheme would be about as similar as you could get it to what he played in Minnesota, and he's from there, played in college there, obviously has a lot of ties to that market. So I thought it made some sense for him as a possible fit. Now that it's not there, it takes one off the board, but I think also takes another option off the board for another team, being Matthew Stafford. So I think there is, however this shakes out, I do think there's going to be a market for Sam Darnold. I think he will have teams that want to give him probably more than the Vikings would want to pay him, both in terms of guaranteed money and years and probably dollars overall. So the dance all week has been, do you feel like you have a buyer if you were going to tag him? Because the risk of tagging him is, if you do it, all of a sudden, you basically have to have somebody that wants him badly enough to sign him long-term to give up something in a trade. Otherwise, you've tagged him, and if you have no dance partner, you're keeping him at that number for 2025. And, he had a great year last year. I think they would like to get McCarthy rolling here, and probably they've built their cap in such a way that I think was the initial plan. So it would take some adjustments if he was going to be back. But I think the key to it would be, by the time that tag deadline rolls around on Tuesday, they would want to know, either have something pretty much lined up or have a very strong indication that they could move him and get what they want back in a trade before that free agency starts and that cap is where it needs to be heading into the 2025 league year. I mean, they're going to have enough money to fit it. It doesn't have to happen right by March 12th, but I think you would want to have a pretty good idea that it is feasible to make the deal you want before you put that tag on him, because once you do that, that number is, kind of baked into the cake for 2025. And you'd want to know that that's going to be a possibility. You're keeping that number before you go ahead and do it.
In effect, you do basically have to have a deal, right? In principle, in theory. I mean, is there nothing in the rules that precludes having conversations like that now with teams, where you literally would say, all right, here, look, if we franchise them, what are you willing to give us? What kind of draft capital and or player, whatever, are you willing to give us? There's nothing precluding the Vikings from having those conversations right now, is there?
No, not really. I mean, I think all of this stuff happens loosely enough, and there's enough ways around whatever tampering rules still exist. I mean, we saw that with Kirk Cousins last year, and the big question of the week about the nature of Tom Brady and Matthew Stafford's reconnaissance in Montana, if that's happening, and no rules are officially being broken such that people are getting penalized for them, I don't think anybody is going to tell the Vikings they can't have those conversations. A lot of these rules kind of have a gambling in Casablanca effect at this point, I think. No, I think they can have those conversations. I think there are ways to do it explicitly or implicitly, and I'm sure they are, because you do need to have a good sense of that. Whether you have a deal lined up or whether you
have to have,
we are so confident that there's a way to do it that we can pull the trigger on it. I think they'd want to know that before Tuesday.
100%. And do we have any idea, and maybe you've written this before, maybe you and I have even talked about it and I don't remember, because it's very open-ended, obviously, about, okay, what would be, from the Vikings standpoint, fair compensation? I mean, this is a guy who obviously had a breakout season. He was terrific until the end, and then it didn't go so well. Are we talking about like a second-round draft pick? Is it a pick and a player? Is it a lower pick? Is it a higher pick? What do you think would be fair here, or in their mind, the minds of the Vikings, because that's who matters here, in their view, what they think would be fair compensation?
Well, I think the baseline, surely from the mechanics of it, would be, they would get a 2026 third-round comp pick if he leaves as a free agent. So you translate a third next year probably to a fourth this year. That would be like the very minimum. I think they'd be looking for more than that.
Right.
Certainly would want to. I think they feel like they have an asset that could get more than that. If they got a 2 or maybe a 3 and something else, yeah. I'm sure they would be pretty interested in that, because even that would be better compensation and more immediate compensation in a year where they need the draft picks than they would get otherwise. So I think if they got a day 2 pick, maybe you throw something else in there, especially if there's enough competition to sweeten things a little bit. I think that would be a nice return for a guy they signed for a $10 million bridge deal, not knowing if he was going to be the guy all year. I mean, if you turned him into that, I think you'd call that a win. And maybe the market would allow a little bit more than that, but I would think at the very least a day 2 pick would be a nice return for Sam Darnold in this case.
From the Vikings standpoint, and your job is obviously this week to follow them as always, what's the biggest headline out of Indianapolis, or what do you think's the most interesting thing you learned about the Vikings?
Well, the tag and trade stuff was interesting, both just kind of in the mechanics of it and just kind of how this market may shake out for Darnold. I mean, I think it was I probably had not considered quite how complicated of a dance this could be to get this done. So I learned a lot about that. I think they are very interested in bringing Byron Murphy back. I think that is a priority for them. We heard that from a number of people this week. They also are taking a very hard look on both lines of scrimmage. I think we knew they were going to do that on the offensive line. They are definitely doing that on the defensive line as well. I think they're very interested in getting a defensive tackle that would be disruptive. They met with Derek Harmon, the Oregon defensive tackle. Sounds like that went very well. I think he made a good impression on them. Could be a disruptive player at the 24th pick if they go that way. So I think both of those lines, they understand, need to be better than they were, because you have to be able to get home with 4 so that your secondary, which may look a little bit different, doesn't have to be on an island quite as much. And you certainly need to be better at protecting whoever the quarterback is than they were. I mean, the season ends with Sam Darnold going down 9 times. It shouldn't be more obvious than it was that they need help on that offensive line. I think those are both big priorities for them. And, I think that's going to be something they look pretty hard at in free agency and the draft. I mean, this is supposed to be a really good defensive tackle draft, so I think that could be a place where they look into it as well. And, just heard a little bit more about kind of next steps on coaching staff and front office stuff. I think the Goessling extension is still coming. It doesn't sound like there's quite as much of a sense of urgency with that as we maybe would think. It's a little more of an open-ended discussion. I don't think anybody's in a huge hurry to get that done right at the moment. But the other thing to keep an eye on, Kevin O'Connell's deal, of course, is done. I found out that goes through 2029. The next step is probably an extension for Brian Flores and Wes Phillips possibly this spring, to get those guys in line as well, because they are up after 2025. So there's still quite a bit of business for them to do from the front office on down. And I think they are progressing pretty quickly to try to make a lot of improvements and upgrades for 25.
Does your intel confirm what I think one of the stories was going into the combine, that the number of running backs here is maybe historic and almost unprecedented? Because clearly it appears that the Vikings, even if they bring Jones back, they're going to want to have some alternatives as well. It's going to be more a committee approach. But what did you learn about the running back position? Is it as deep as has been suggested?
Yeah, it is. It's one of those years where there are going to be a lot of those guys to pick from, which I think is a good thing because they certainly would like to add there. I think that it's no secret they would like to bring Aaron Jones back, but I think they also want to add somebody else with him that can take some of the load off and then maybe add a little bit of a different dimension to their running game. And I think they'll be able to do it. And there are going to be guys there in the first round. I think there could be guys in the back half of the first round that they look at, but they have enough other needs, whether it's corner, defensive tackle, offensive line, that they may not do it in the first round. I think it's still going to be one of those years where you might be able to find a guy in the third, maybe even on day 3 that is attractive and able to help pretty quickly because there is that kind of depth in this class. You may get a guy on day 3 that ordinarily would go higher than that and just gets pushed down because this class is that deep. So it's a good year to need one of those, and they certainly are looking very hard at it. I think that'll be something they address, and it's probably a year where the supply may meet their demand to make that happen.
What did you hear in Indianapolis on Rodgers? Because it now one of the stories I think I read today was that the Giants were allegedly heavy after trying to figure out if they could acquire Stafford. That obviously is no longer an option, and that they very quickly have moved their attention, shifted their attention to Aaron Rodgers playing with the other New York team.
Yeah, the saga continues there. I mean, it's one of those things where if you're going to do it, you have to go in with your eyes open to all of it. The opinions he's going to have on who else he wants to bring with him, the opinions he may have on how his off-season schedule looks, the opinions he may share on Pat McAfee on Tuesday. You are getting a guy that brings a lot with him, and you have to decide, is that worth it when he's going to be, I think, 42 in December, I want to say. So, yeah, I mean, I think is still, it looks like he's wanting to play. It looks like, every indication is that he is thinking pretty seriously about being back in 25. It's interesting how this is going to go because I think for a lot of teams, you'd look at it and say, if we're not one player away, is this something we really want to take on? Is this kind of a rodeo we want to get ourselves involved with when it may not be for more than a year? I would love to be in some of those discussions about Aaron Rodgers and people saying, we know everything that's going to come with it. We also know the resume. We know that he hasn't played like that guy in the last couple of years. So I think it's going to be pretty fascinating to watch how that shakes out. And as always with him, he will not, despite what he may say, he will not shy away from the attention and the drama that seems to follow him around these days. So, yeah, certainly one to keep an eye on. I think it'll be fascinating with him as it always seems to be these days.
Adam in White Bear Lake asks, I think, a very relevant question, and I hope you have the answer to it. I'll at least try. If we tag Darnold and don't trade him before the draft, but then the Vikings trade him in camp before the season starts, does the cap hit stay with the Vikings or does it transfer to the other team? Do you know the ramifications from a salary cap standpoint about that timing?
Well, the cap hit would transfer because it's basically a base salary for 2025. The only thing that would stay is the dead money from his previous deal.
Okay.
I think probably what would happen, in a lot of chances, I think the way this would work practically, this is kind of what the Jaguars did with the Yannick Ngakoue back in 2020, I want to say, when they traded him to the Vikings. I think they ended up signing him to an extension that moved a little bit of the money to Minnesota, kind of as a cost of doing business on the deal. I could see something like that happening too. I think there's a deadline. I want to say it's in July that a guy actually has to sign the franchise tag. So just because he signs it does not mean that number would be 100% what he plays on in 2025. And then there are ways to kind of tear that up and make it so that not all of that money stays with the Vikings. So one way or the other, I would not look at that as this is, baked in right now. The only question is how long would it take to do it, and then how much of that cap space is kind of almost like a hold on your credit card, I guess, before it gets done. I think that's maybe more of the financial mechanism that would be worth watching there, but I think there'd be ways to work around that.
This might not surprise you, but when the story broke that we finished real high in the NFLPA surveys on a number of fronts about, help the friendly to families and good feedback and good everything and kumbaya and good feeling, that I felt like if you're a fan, there's limits to caring all that much about that stuff. That if you're the NFLPA, I get why you want to nurture this whole concept, because your job is to try to create the best working environment possible for players. So I don't blame them, but I do worry that people tend to want to make the connections that that's the key to having success on the field. And, look no further than the fact that I think both the Eagles and the Chiefs ranked fairly low. And that's not me saying you should strive necessarily to rank low. But I think for me, Ben, it is still kind of a reminder that there's not always this straight line between all these conditions are good and everybody likes everybody and having success. I know the days of hardcore creative tension are over. A fear-based approach, I get it. That's probably over too. But to me, that all that survey stuff and who was high and who was in the middle and who was low is a reminder that it's interesting information. You factor it in, but I'm not buying that really is what has to be essential to determining whether at the end of the season you're playing for big games.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, you've seen it the last couple of years. I mean, the Dolphins have been at the top the last 2 years. I mean, the Dolphins are not making deep playoff runs. They've had teams that looked like they were talented enough to do that, but it hasn't happened. And, certainly the Vikings, for all of their high rankings, have yet to win a playoff game in the years where they're doing that. So I think they know that. I think it's one of those things where I'll give the NFLPA credit. They have done a brilliant job of sort of changing the expectations by making this a competitive thing in a lot of ways and getting a lot of media attention for it. It becomes a thing that gets talked about a lot around this time of the year. They release it at a point where everybody is in Indianapolis. Everybody is able to ask questions about it, and there are a lot of eyes on the NFL. I don't think that's any accident. And by making it competitive, you have essentially put pressure on teams to up the amenities. A lot of these rankings end up being about facilities, amenities for players as much as it is about, certainly the coaches, the owners, the medical staff, everything gets ranked, but a lot of it comes down to if you have really, really nice facilities, you're going to score highly in these things. Well, the Commanders, when I was covering the Nationals, I spent some time helping out on that beat. That is not a nice facility. That is one of the worst in the NFL, and that stadium is certainly the worst in the NFL. They were in the NFC Championship game last year because, I don't know how much of it was happy players, but they have a quarterback that was transformational as a rookie. It still comes down to players winning games, and there may be a incidental benefit, I think, and certainly the Vikings believe that there's a benefit to having a team that connects well, and certainly players that want to play for you and players that want to sign with you. That's a good thing. But ultimately it comes down to what you do on the field and comes down to players making plays, coaches having the answers. All of that stuff is what wins games. And the fact that the Eagles and Chiefs are not terribly high in those rankings and yet are playing at the end of just about every season is probably proof of that point.
Very well said. We appreciate the conversation as always, and we will chat next week. Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Dan.
Ben Goessling, brought to you by our good friends at Standard Heating and Air Conditioning. Goessling, I should say Lavelle. We just had Goessling. Lavelle in about 35 minutes or so. We do have a top 5 at 5 to get to. Guardsy out. Brett Blakemore is in. What are we going to talk about?
Wild Wolves and new NFL rules.